back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I'm the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today is Arturo McFields, who is the former ambassador of Nicaragua to OAS and currently a journalist. He's with us to discuss a very interesting topic, which is Nicaragua's seeming openness to the Taliban. One may ask, what does Nicaragua, a Latin American country, have to do with the Taliban, which has assumed control in Afghanistan, in Southeast Asia? What do they have in common other than authoritarian trends? That is the topic we will discuss today, and we will delve into all aspects of this controversy, which were published just recently in The Hill. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start by talking about a little bit about your background. How did you end up being an ambassador, a professional diplomat? What was it like working within OAS, and what made you ultimately leave your position and break ties with the Nicaragua government?
Thank you for the opportunity to be in your program, Irina. It's such a pleasure, even though more people know you for your writings and analysis on other media outlets. This is a nice space to just have this conversation. Well, I am primarily a journalist, and for more than 25 years or so, even if I don't look that, but it's been a while. And I always said, no matter what I do, I'm always a journalist. So my first experience working in international relations was in the Peace Corps of Norway. They don't have it anymore. They used to have a program called South-South. And as a journalist, then I was called to work as a press attaché in the Nicaragua embassy to the United States in Washington, D.C. So after a few years, I was invited to join the team of the Nicaragua mission to the Organization of American States. And first I was the minister, and well, I started as a first secretary, then was the number 2 position in the mission. And finally, I was ambassador for 3 months because the situation in my country got really bad, and there was no political will to make a single change to improve the situation, but it was getting worse and worse and worse. And I gotta tell you, at the beginning, when the Ortega dictatorship started, they came after the revolution and all that. They came back to power, presenting a new approach, trying to say that they're going to be friends with sectors like the Catholic Church. They're going to be friends with the private sector, and they're going to be friends even with the United States. That's what they said 17 years ago, 16, 17 years ago, when they took over power again. And for 10 years, they tried to maintain that kind of alliance with the church, with private sector. But after a few years, the people got fed up of the regime. And when that happened, and the Ortega government take off the mask of democracy and went back to the old dictatorship style. And when that happened, many people that used to be on their side turned to the other side because they were tired of this new phase of repression and brutality. And day by day, it's getting worse. When we were thinking like it won't get any worse, last month, they announced that they're going to establish relationship with the Taliban. Not even Cuba, not even Venezuela in the Western Hemisphere has been that crazy or maybe even politically stupid to open relationship with one of the worst regimes in the world that are not even recognized by the United Nations. So situation in Nicaragua is getting worse, but I will let you ask me the other questions to go through the explaining.
So let's actually look back on Nicaragua's position, geopolitical position, and its historic role. It has had a very significant role during the Cold War, and it's had a fraught history since then. And it's interesting that you mentioned that the regime took off its mask. You know, ironically, there is this stereotype of populist, tin-pot dictators in Latin America banging the drums of either right-wing or left-wing dictatorships, and just, having this very, very emotional approach to politics. But it sounds to me like the message the Ortega regime presented, was appealing exactly to the opposite. It's to more rational, more governance focused, more substantive messaging that appealed to a broader cross section of different people, and that seemed to be aiming to fix the problems that were presented in previous years. What went wrong? Why did why did this not work out, and why did they go back to their to a very stereotypical role in government?
Well, I believe in this saying that the politicians are like the Pampers. They need to be changed every now and then, and for the same reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So after a while, they messed up, primarily because they lost the money coming from Venezuela. It was like something like $500 million per year. In a small country of 7 million inhabitants, that helped the regime to give money away for different sectors, create different social programs, and always giving money with open hands coming from the corruption system of Venezuela. And everybody was happy with that. Ortega giving money from everywhere. And also Ortega was getting money from the World Bank, IDB, International Monetary Fund. It was living the dream. But to some extent, when Venezuela stopped giving money, Ortega started giving repression. You know, when
Mm-hmm.
they used to give the carrot, but when the carrot they don't have it, they start giving the stick to the people. And 2018 was the year when Ortega discovered that the people was fed up of repression, was fed up of corruption, and instead of creating dialogue, understanding, and democracy, Ortega went loose and did something that, like I said, not even the Cuba regime in this 21st century, at least, have ever done. Ortega dissolved the protests, shooting real bullets. We have never seen that before, and more than 355 people were killed, even children's, even women. So 2018 was the beginning of the darkest era in Nicaragua, and year after year was getting worse. And people used to say, this is not gonna get worse. And then Ortega started putting in jail priests, altar boys. He was shooting bullets to the church, to the temples. And he went wild against the Catholic Church. And now in this new phase, it's even against the evangelical church, which used to be kind of an in-between friends of the regime during some times. So right now, Ortega is seeing something that not all the left-wing experience, which is total isolation. In Latin America, Ortega is alone. He's totally alone. So this solitude, this loneliness has pushed him to look friends and in the most unusual sources. For instance, June will be remembered as the month when Ortega formally established relations with North Korea and the Taliban. In 1 month, he opened relations with the most brutal regimes in the world. And not only that, both of them share something, which is the antagonist position against the United States. So what we are seeing right now is something really dangerous, because Ortega is opened the door of the country not only to another totalitarian regime, but terrorist regime. And he's offering Nicaragua as a platform to go straight to the United States. And I'm not speculating. Ortega has a free visa program to many nations. It's almost 100 nations that are getting free visa to go to Nicaragua, or at least they have to pay like a small stipend to access the country, but they don't need background checks. They don't need nothing. And matter of fact, Ortega is promoting flights from different countries, former Soviet Unions, and also African countries like are considered failed states, and is bringing all that people together to Nicaragua, and from Nicaragua to the border with Honduras and all the way to the United States in less than a week. This is something that we have never seen. And behind all this, there's a political intention, but it's also an economic intention, because every single person that take these charter flights to Nicaragua pay an average of $10,000. In the last 12 months, it's been 1,000 flights. So it's a lot of money. And for some reason, we believe that Ortega is not alone, because the propaganda in Africa is super strong. And the only country that has this platform of propaganda in Africa is Russia.
So let's start from the beginning. You mentioned how, Ortega was willing to play by the rules so long as he received financial benefits from Venezuela. What happened, why did Venezuela, which is by no means, a standard bearer of democracy and human rights and, or good governance, how did they abandon Ortega? What happened between them?
The things that Venezuela in the last, let's say, 6 years has experienced sanctions because of its brutality, and also the corruption has bring down one of the most richest countries in terms of oil production, and nowadays they are a very poor country that is not even the half of the things that they used to be during the 80s. And even in some moment with Hugo Chavez, they used to have this growing economy with oil and everything. 2018 was the year when Venezuela started losing its capacity to give money to the two dictatorships of the hemisphere, Cuba and Nicaragua. The fountain of money start to run out, and that translates it has like a butterfly effect on Nicaragua and also on the dictatorships of Cuba.
So essentially, they lost patronage for economic reasons, because Venezuela finally even ran out of other people's money to support this network of miscreants in the region. But then, at what what is the connection between this loss on money? I understand the general authoritarian trends, but what was Ortega's problems with the church and with the evangelicals? Why did he decide, rather than appealing them and trying to get money from them, to go after them?
The main problem is that in Nicaragua, there is no possibility that you have a different way of thinking. You have to think just like the government. So when there's a voice that says something different or wants to be independent from the government, you're going to be you're going to become a target of the government. But Ortega has been doing this little by little, little by little. And there was a point that the final enemy was the church, because the politicians were like silenced. The journalists were expelled from the country, independent media. More than 300 journalists were expelled from the country. More than 50 media were shut down. So the situation was getting worse. And when Ortega ran out of enemies, the only enemy or the only voice that he considers a threat was the church. And now we are in the phase that he is against the church. And sadly, this year, in the last month of April, we are in a phase that the church in the country is silenced for some kind of agreement that Ortega managed to deal with the Catholic Church. We're going to allow you to exist, but you're going to exist silence. So after that, we have seen how the church has moved like significant leaders from here to there, and Ortega released some of the Catholic leaders that were in jail, and every now and then, even the Catholic leaders that are out of the country are removed from places, are pressured to be quiet, and there is a lot of things going on. Because Ortega, like I said, once he silenced everybody, they said, okay, the only voice that is still a little bit critical is the church. So we need to do something about it. So at this moment, Ortega has established one of the most totalitarian regimes in the country, to the extent that in Nicaragua, you cannot raise the flag of our country. If you do that, you go into jail.
Why?
Because that flag, remember that in 2018, the country rise up against the regime, and they rise up with the flag of our nation. So Ortega, every time he sees that flag, thinks that it's a threat to his regime.
Is there a new flag that he's pushing?
Excuse me?
Is there a different flag that he is using or planning?
He is using the flag of the party.
I see.
The flag of the party. Every now and then, he allows his people to use the Nicaraguan flag to show some kind of a normalcy, to some extent. But if a regular citizen has the flag outside or in the streets, immediately, the police will approach you and will ask you, why are you using this flag? And they can even, just to have an example, last year or this year, I'm not. The Miss Universe contest was won by a Nicaraguan beautiful lady, Miss Universe. But she became a symbol of beauty in a country that has a brutal dictatorship. So there was this young artist that were celebrating the new Miss Universe. They paint a mural or a wall with her face. They haven't even finished painting that when they were incarcerated, just for painting a wall with Miss Universe, just because. So there is a brutal regime in Nicaragua that is not even compared to the dictatorships of Cuba or Venezuela. Cuba, for instance, is a dictatorship that knows how to play in the international arena. Proof of this is that they've been elected 7 times to the International Human Rights Council in the United Nations. Even if they are a dictatorship of 65-year-old, they are in the Human Rights Council of the United Nations. Doesn't make sense, but that shows you how they manipulate and how they sell this image of the revolution, of the anti-system, and they know how to sell the idea of a revolution. But Nicaragua is in another level. Nicaragua is getting more similar to the Taliban. They know they are doing wrong and they don't care. And in this context of isolation, Ortega is reaching out to those countries that are similar to him. Let's call it North Korea. Let's call it the Taliban. It's not an accident that in the month of June, Ortega established formal relationship with those two countries in just 1 month. So it's not the common thing, because if you study the history of Nicaragua, Nicaragua has never been friends with Afghanistan, especially during the 80s, because there was a different relationship. Nicaragua was always with Russia, and the Afghanistan people was fighting against the Russian invasion. So there's no relationship. But in this new context, Nicaragua is isolated. And Afghanistan, as you know, is been struggling to get some legitimizing the regime. You know, they are working through that. We saw that on the United Nations. They are trying to push to get some kind of recognition. So Ortega is trying to help them and offering the Central American platform to come to this country. Nicaragua is 2.5 hours away on a plane from Miami, Florida.
So here's a very interesting thing that you mentioned. You know, Nicaragua and Russia have had, you know, the Soviet Union and now Moscow, the Kremlin, they have had this historic relationship. And most recently, Russia, although did not officially recognize the Taliban yet, they committed to removing them from international terrorist designations, and they're pushing Central Asian countries into recognizing the Taliban and forming diplomatic relations, and they succeeded with at least one country. Is it possible that Russia is the intermediary facilitating this rapprochement?
There's a saying, the enemies of my enemies are my friends. So even though they don't have a huge historic relationship, on the contrary, the history between Russia and Afghanistan is like, but the enemies of my enemies are my friends. Just to tell you how Russia used Nicaragua as a piece on a chess game. Russia has a strong conflict with Germany because they are supporting the fight in Ukraine. So what Russia did? Call Ortega and says, Ortega, I want you to take Germany to the international court, because they are financing a massacre, a genocide, crimes against humanity in Palestine. And Ortega immediately obeyed that order and had the audacity to take Germany, a strong democracy, to the court. And it was so obvious that Ortega used the same lawyer that has defended Putin in that same court. So Nicaragua is a useful piece in the chess of Russia. Nicaragua is working to bring Russia to Central America also as a key player in security and some kind of or regional organization called SICA is the main Central American organization. Ortega is pushing to bring Russia in. And in that context, the main objective is not only to mess with Germany, but also to provoke the United States, which is the main problem in the United States right now, migration. Mm-hmm. Ortega is a bouncing platform to take people from Nicaragua to the United States without any background check. I was checking on the news, and earlier last month, remember that 8 members of ISIS from Tajikistan were found in different cities. Mm-hmm. Guess what? Tajikistan is one of the countries that Ortega offered free visa and free flight charters to Nicaragua. So it won't be a surprise that those terrorists that were found in the US, they came through Nicaragua, which is a open heaven for migration without any background checks and without any control or previous registration. Once they are in the border, they surrender themselves, and then they go free in the United States.
Well, that certainly speaks to the border security issues on the US front as well, but that's a different story. Now let's look at this very strange coalition, given that Taliban is a fundamentalist Islamist movement that is, that is completely anti any other religions. How does Ortega well, I mean, Ortega is already discredited, to put it mildly, but doesn't, given his isolation in Latin America, first of all, what does he have to offer the Taliban besides, in terms of his capacity? Isn't there pressure from the rest of the continent not to allow such people in, given their, let's just say, their fundamentalist attitude?
We live sad times in terms of democracy in Central America. We live re-elections times, constitutional reforms to stay in power forever, corruption cases, drug trafficking. So there's kind of a policy that is like, you scratch my back and I scratch yours. You keep silence with the things I'm doing. I keep silence with the things you are doing. And on the other hand, there's like lack of a strong presence of leadership like we used to see in the past from the United States in Nicaragua, in Central America. If you consider how many trips at the highest level has been done to Latin America or Central America in recent years, how many trips have been made to the highest level to Europe? So the region is kind of enjoying some kind of lack of attention, and many things are happening. Like, for instance, this migration strategy of Ortega has received the only punishment that is removal of visas from officials of the dictatorship. You know how much a dictator will cry if you remove his US visa? They don't care. Nicaragua still enjoys preferential tariff to exports to the United States under the free trade agreement. How in the world are you allowing that when this country is opening relationships with the Taliban? So there's a sad position going on. Maybe because it is seen like if we pressure too much Ortega and we remove these benefits of free trade with the United States, migration and unemployment is going to grow. And they're going to come to the United States because there's going to be a lot of unemployment. But you know what? That is already happening. But still, Ortega enjoys free trade agreement with the United States. Free trade agreement with the United States is not a God-given right. Free trade agreement with the United States is a privilege. And when a country is behaving like Nicaragua, that privilege has to be removed. Unfortunately, it's not.
So let's look at this very strange combination of actors. You have Russia using Nicaragua as a pawn. You have North Korea, which is still essentially mostly isolated. The biggest news was the Putin's visit recently. Otherwise, nobody ever goes there. You have the Taliban, which has no international recognition and which is making oil deals with China, with Russia, and so forth. And Pakistan, even with them, they have a strange relationship. Now you have Nicaragua, which is isolated within its continent. How exactly these countries are all not doing too well in terms of diplomatic weight on the international stage? The lawsuit against Germany was very quickly dealt with by the ICJ. It attracted attention for about 5 minutes, and then the complaint was basically dismissed. It's certainly not going to go anywhere. So what exactly do you think this coalition is just a desperate ploy because they feel like they have to do something just to survive and annoy the West? Or do you think there is a real possibility that they could attract more and more influential actors once they do enough themselves to pave the ground?
Well, I believe this. Russia and China have this strategy. If the West gets closer to my zone of influence, let's call it Ukraine. If the West come close to China's so-called area of influence, let's call it Taiwan, well, they are doing now the same. They are pushing to bad actors to come closer to the U.S. zone of influence, the Western Hemisphere. They are just like a few weeks ago, we saw the ships that went to the warships that went to Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
This week, there are other warships in Venezuela. Just to give you an idea of this, Nicaragua, 2.5 hours away from Florida, was the only country in the Western Hemisphere, the only country in the Western Hemisphere that participated in the war games of Russia called Vostok 2022. The only country in the Western Hemisphere, not even Cuba, not even Venezuela, but Nicaragua. Nicaragua is playing a key role in this new approach of war games between Russia, China against the US, because they feel like Nicaragua just expelled or managed to expel Taiwan from the Parliament of Central America. That was for China such a huge goal, because they managed to maneuver and do that. And now the next move is to bring Russia to the main organization of Central America, which is the SICA. So what they are doing is this kind of game. If you get closer from my area of influence, you are threatening me in Ukraine, I'm going to give you that paper bag, and I'm going to threaten you in your own backyard, 2.5 hours away from the US. So it's a situation dangerous. It's a very, very serious thing, but for some reason it's been like dismissed or treated lightly. Like, we don't want to make too much noise about it because it's an electoral year, and we are working with other countries. But in fact, Ortega is feeling like he can do everything and got away with it. I mean, you establish relationship with the Taliban and you still enjoy free trade with the US? That's nonsense. That's nonsense.
So here's my question, because I see a paradox here. On the one hand, Ortega is isolated. He does not have good relations with other Latin American countries. He is not like Cuba, playing games on the international stage. On the other hand, he seems to be making progress in Latin America with, kicking Taiwan out and trying to bring Russia in. If he is so bad at these, maneuvers, how is he succeeding?
Well, like I said, it's not in all Latin America, just the little 7 countries that are part of the Central American area. So all of these countries in Central America have kind of a bad situation, not as Nicaragua, of course. Nicaragua is the worst. Like I said, even worse than Cuba. But for some reason, I'm going to give you the example on how they managed to expel Taiwan. As you know, Taiwan has been losing more and more of the countries that recognize Taiwan. In Central America, currently, there are only 2 countries that still maintain relationship with Taiwan, Guatemala and Belize. They are receiving a strong pressure from China. So what Ortega did was this. Okay, most of the countries that comprise the Central American Parliament don't have relationship with Taiwan. Why we don't expel Taiwan at the end of the day? And then they manage and say, okay, let's do it, and they do it, and they did it. Now Ortega is trying to do the same with the main organization with this Central American integration system. But that is something that is not that easy. It's not that easy because Guatemala, which is one of the biggest countries in Central America, is not allowing that. But Guatemala is receiving huge pressure from China, which is like affecting the economy, the exports, and it's a very strong commercial war against Guatemala just because they maintain relationship with Taiwan. So what I'm saying is this: Ortega tried to bring Russia to Central America, but he has not succeeded. China has succeeded to some extent because of the commercial investments and all these bribes that China knows how to promote, investments here, investment there, the trap debt that has offered to Africa, as you know well, and they know how to do it. Russia has not getting Central America as Ortega wanted to. And that's something that they are still working on. Ortega currently, this month, has taken the presidency of the pro tempore presidency of the Central American integration system. It's something that lasts just for 6 months. But in those 6 months, his main agenda is to bring Russia in and take Taiwan out. Because Taiwan is out of the parliament, Central American parliament, but it still is part of the main body of Central American nation as an observer.
So a small, poor, authoritarian country is able to play an outsized diplomatic role simply by exploiting, niche positions effectively. That's a lesson for both the United States and other bigger players in the region.
That is something that Russia and China knows how to do. They give you money, they give you projects, they give you investment, and they said, we don't care about democracy. No worries. You can re-elect yourself. You can reform the constitution. You can have corruption here, corruption there. Don't worry about it. We are your partners, but we don't care about democracy and human rights. And like I said, I believe that the region needs and deserves more attention, more robust cooperation, and some kind of, because the mistake that we are making most time is that to think that migration is a problem that happens on the border, and it's not. It's not a problem of just security. It needs foreign policy from those countries that are the main drivers of this migration. But Nicaragua is special. It's not like regular migration. Like I said, if you are open the doors to the Taliban, you know where are they headed to. And they're gonna go to the border, they're gonna surrender themselves, and then they're gonna be walking in New York.
So from that perspective, I think it's obvious with the Taliban and even North Korea are gaining from it. They gain access, they get intelligence, they get logistical facilitation of their activity, and they get another country that recognizes them. However isolated it may be, it's still better than nothing. What is Nicaragua gaining from these relationships other than pissing off the United States and exploiting this anti-American sentiment? What is it that they get in return?
Just to let you know, the most important economic forum in Latin America, organized by China, you know what is going to take place?
In Nicaragua.
So when you bring, let's be real, China offers a lot of money and a lot of projects. Some of them are very lousy projects. But the thing is that they have all this money to offer. And if they said the most important economic forum that we launch in Latin America is going to be in Nicaragua, people is like, I don't care. I'm going where the money is. And it's helping Nicaragua to break isolation. Just because Nicaragua shows me loyalty when they expel Taiwan from the Parliament of Central America. So this is your reward, Nicaragua. I'm going to give you more. And there are a lot of projects that China is offering here and there. As we know, China is always one step ahead. For instance, they are taking in a record time all the gold production of the country, all. And Ortega is taking concessions from other sectors, from other companies, and is handing those concessions to China. And China is taking the gold of Nicaragua in no time, in a record time. Now China is creating, like in other countries, you know, critical infrastructure. Let's call it airport, let's call it ports, let's call it highways, and all that is bringing to Nicaragua because it's a useful actor for these regimes, and it's getting some kind of reward. But it's not a full reward, like I said. China is always getting something front and center of every single thing that they do. They never lost. They always one step ahead.
What is the specific terms of this recognition of the Taliban in North Korea? Are there any specific agreements that they have come to other than establishing embassies?
Well, they maintain in secret many things, but they have said, well, we are establishing relationship, but we are not bringing an embassy yet of North Korea to Nicaragua. At least they haven't inaugurated yet. And in the case of the Taliban, what they are doing is taking advantage of the only country in the world that truly recognized at the highest level Taliban, which is China. So the same ambassador of Nicaragua in China is the one that is establishing from China this relationship with the Taliban. Guess who's helping to? Guess who's helping to have this honeymoon between these two countries?
So China is...
It's not an accident. Nothing is an accident that the Nicaraguan ambassador in China is the representative to the Taliban. It's not an accident.
So this is all very interesting. So the recent Putin visit to North Korea aroused a lot of controversy. First, because many people did not think that the relationship between the two countries would go so far. They, in my opinion, were overly optimistic. I predicted otherwise, and I turned out to be correct. But more interestingly is that for China, that relationship could, in the long term, be a challenge because North Korea is seeking foreign policy independence. Russia does not wish to be overly dependent on China for its own reasons. So the two of them coming together is a short-term good news for China, long-term possibly a challenge. How do you see this relationship between North Korea and Nicaragua, a long-time Russian asset, playing into China's interests?
Just one question. When was this agreement between North Korea and China?
Well, North Korea is just viewed as a protectorate, as being protected as a protege of
But
China.
In which month was this agreement?
Which agreement? You mean Russia?
This between Russia and North Korea.
Just within the past couple of weeks.
In June.
Yes.
The same month when Ortega established relationship with them. These things don't happen by accident. These things don't like happening randomly. Everything is super coordinated. Everything. And Ortega he works like a soldier. He does what Russia tells him to do without hesitation. So nothing is happened like a random accident. Like I said, who's the ambassador to the Taliban? The same ambassador in China. But in the case of North Korea, Nicaragua does have its history with North Korea. The revolution, or the so-called revolution of Nicaragua in 1979 received help when they were in the guerrillas from North Korea. A few of the highest guerrilla leaders went to North Korea to train themselves and get some kind of experience with some military experience in North Korea. And one of the first things that the dictatorship in the 80s, 79, they took power, 82, immediately they break relationship with South Korea. And they work closely with North Korea. So in the case of North Korea, Ortega has a long history of love and friendship. But when Ortega came to power and played as a Democrat actor, he did not want to recognize North Korea. He waited for 14 years because he knew that wouldn't be good if he was trying to play as a Democratic actor. So there are a few things that are interesting. But in the case of North Korea, they have a huge history together. Even Ortega and his wife traveled to North Korea in the 80s, and they were received with like gods over there. The grandfather of Kim Jong-un was the one that received him with all the honors. The face of Ortega all over the streets. It was a huge thing in the 80s. So they have history together. They have history together. And in this context of war or pre-war, this relationship is starting a new season of love and friendship.
So what can we expect in terms of economic, I would say, economic outcome from these relationships? I mean, Afghanistan and the Taliban is looking for oil, energy deals. On the other hand, what it has to offer is all these precious stones that are difficult to extract without external assistance. What does Nicaragua think it can get? How do you see this economic network working?
Well, I believe they are not expecting much on the economic arena, particularly because Afghanistan and North Korea, I believe they don't even produce sufficient food to eat. So Ortega he knows that. He knows that economically, there's nothing that they're gonna get, especially because of the distance between the countries, the logistics. There is no logistic there for commerce. But Ortega is counting on the reward from Russia and from China. That's the only Ortega. And like I said, he's starting to harvest some of these things. And as I mentioned, the most important event, they have announced that they will launch in sometime by the end of this year. And China is little by little giving some of his poison candies to Nicaragua. So just like they have done it in Africa, you know, nothing is free with China. Nothing is free. And on the long run, they know how to pay, how to ask for something in return. So what I see is that Ortega is counting on China and Russia, and this relationship with these countries, he's not gonna get nothing in terms of commerce at all. There's nothing there.
Well, what's more interesting is a different aspect, which is illicit defense programs, but by all of these actors. Russia is looking for defense assistance, given the level of sanctions. North Korea, the same. It looks to improve its missile program. It's both countries and China, they're all nuclear powers. The Taliban wants to have tighter control over the country, and they certainly want to have an independent defense force. And Nicaragua, of course, could benefit from all these endeavors by playing a mercenary role, like Cuba and North Korea have done for decades. So the question is, what can we expect? What new threat can emerge from this sort of array coming closer together?
Well, I believe that it's a dangerous cocktail when you put North Korea and when you put the Taliban together on the same small country. I believe that the U.S. should be paying more attention to this, even if it's not in Nicaragua, at least with the other countries of the region, working something on this regard. But whatever it is, the policy of ignoring or diminishing the problem or saying that it's not a threat when we know it's always problem. Like I said, what happened with Tajikistan weeks ago, remember, eight alleged members of ISIS in New York, in other cities. That's something that should be worried, especially because the only country that has free visa with the Tajikistan is Nicaragua, and the only country that have charter flights from Tajikistan to Central America, to the Western Hemisphere, is Nicaragua. And still, I believe that we need a new foreign policy for Nicaragua in particular, and evaluate the cooperation that is being carried out in terms of economic, in terms of the presence, bilateral presence in both countries, and diplomatic relations. Something's got to happen. But ignoring this problem, I believe when you act, when it's happened, when it's too late, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. You have to be proactive. You have to be preventive, and expect the best if you want to, but you have to prepare for the worst, especially when you see the strong presence of Russia and China behind the scenes, and Ortega is willing to do anything to annoy the United States, but beyond the political provocation, what happened a few weeks ago with these persons from Tajikistan should be like a warning signal, and saying, if this is happening with Tajikistan, what is going to happen with Afghanistan and the Taliban? Still are going to ignore this problem? So I think something got to be done. I don't have the crystal ball to tell you what to do, but I believe this thing got to get more serious and more cautious, because Ortega has proven in the past that he always liked to be an actor in the center of these controversies, and he's willing to do whatever to affect in any way the United States, especially in a context of elections when migration is such a big issue.
I'm going to be blunt. Can Nicaragua become a new center of terrorism and illicit material smuggling in Latin America?
I don't know, but I should be paying close attention to these developments. And like I said, irrational countries like North Korea, irrational countries that you cannot establish any kind of agreement, like rational agreement with them, or countries like the Taliban that is almost killing women that are still living, but they are totally like without any single right. I mean, they are living there. So when you have countries that work that way, you cannot disregard any kind of situation, especially because we know that China is supporting a lot of things for Nicaragua related to critical infrastructure, and in some moment that can play a key role. They said that it's for investment and trades, but we know that China works the two ways, for trade, but also for possible war scenarios that they can consider that can be useful in some moment. I'm not saying that right now. I'm not that crazy to say something is happening. No, but in a rational manner, in a preventive and proactive manner, we should pay a little bit more attention to what's going on.
Finally, is there, given Russia's and China's influence and infiltration of all the political institutions and military institutions in Nicaragua, is there any opportunity for the opposition of any sort to emerge and change the regime from inside? Or what can be done to get rid of that current, the current dictatorship?
Well, at least 55 or 60% of the exports of Nicaragua go straight to the U.S. And we are talking about something like $5 billion in exports, something like that. And in terms of remittances, more or some $4 billion in remittances came to Nicaragua last year. So are a few billions, not millions, billions of reasons that are at the disposal of the United States to do something regarding Nicaragua. And I believe it can be done. Something very positive, I must say this, something very positive and on the right direction is that last month, the United States, for the very first time, established sanctions against a Russian security complex that is created in Nicaragua, a huge, a strange security complex that they have in Nicaragua, and that was used to train against drug trafficking. Look at this, against drug trafficking, the whole Central American region. So the United States says, we're gonna cut that off. If someone is being trained there, it's not gonna be an easy thing to happen. We're gonna sanction this Russia facility in Nicaragua and sanctions another officials related to this huge police security anti-drug trafficking center.
Mm-hmm.
That's a positive thing, but it doesn't have to be an isolated thing. It has to be something sustained, not like once in a year, because the policy of sanctions of visas, that's laughable for a regime like Ortega.
Mm-hmm.
If they said we're gonna take out your visa for the United States, they don't even come to the United States. So they need more strong, significant, well thought sanctions instead of just removing visas. Like I said, 60% of the exports of Nicaragua depend on the United States. 60%. And that's something that they should consider. 4 billion in remittances. That's something to be considered. So they have a huge toolkit and even initiatives of laws that have been approved in the United States, but they are not being fully implemented, unfortunately.
Well, that's quite a staggering amount, given all things considered. I'm actually quite shocked. But another shocking thing is, in general, despite all these horrible atrocities, internal and external developments you mentioned, Nicaragua's growing role within this dangerous nexus, as well as its own slide into totalitarianism, is largely unnoticed by US institutions, and that may be part of the reason why there is so little pressure to take action. I don't think that the horrible massacre you mentioned got even a fraction of attention of the events, for instance, in the Middle East. You know, I'm not sure that anyone other than State Department officials working on annual reports are aware of Nicaragua's religious oppression. You know, maybe a few members of Congress with a specific interest in freedom of religion. Otherwise, there's this assumption, okay, there's a dictatorship and, you know, it's a Catholic country. There's absolutely no discussion of the religious oppression that we read on a daily basis, which is quite shocking. What can be done to generate this kind of attention to the increasingly not only hostile but toxic role that the Ortega regime is playing in a way that's far more destructive than what people imagine?
One congressman from Florida, Maria Elvira Salazar, from Florida, he said this week or last, I don't remember well, he said that the U.S. should consider to include Nicaragua in one of the lists that says that Nicaragua is one of the terrorist-sponsored nation. At least. And he's starting to develop this, and I believe it's super important because at least they should like identify Nicaragua as that. Not a terrorist, but a sponsor of terrorist nation. You are opening the door to a Taliban. These are not kids selling candies in the supermarket. This is the Taliban, for Christ's sake. We should do something. The world should do something. So, and the other thing that is not paying attention to is that the whole Central American region is getting contaminated by this thing. Because they said, if Ortega get away with it, so that means I can do the same thing. So, an example need to be set. An example need to be set. Otherwise, it's not going to be just Nicaragua. It's going to be the whole region that you're going to have. Like, for instance, the other day, the president of Honduras, a neighboring country of Nicaragua, said that he celebrates the transparent and fair election in Russia after the killing of Navalny. So what I'm saying is, these kind of things need to be taken more seriously. And like I said, having Russia, China, Taliban, North Korea, and even Iran. You know that the late president of Iran, he only visited 3 countries in Latin America: Cuba, Venezuela, and you know which is the other one. So are the kind of things that we need to pay attention to instead of trying to water down. No, it's not gonna happen. They won't dare. I have to say it. Me myself, I used to say, no, they will never put in jail as a priest. They will never put in jail a bishop. Surprise to me, they have done that. They expel from the country the Mother Teresa mission. And I'm like, the Mother Teresa mission? Are you kidding me? So are the kind of things that are happening in Nicaragua need more attention? Is too close from the United States to be ignored this way. And sadly, when we act like this, some things happen, and they don't happen overnight.
Well, thank you so much for this illuminating discussion on issues that are unfortunately very poorly covered and very poorly understood otherwise. And I hope that the audience starts watching this video will pay more attention. And I really, really hope that not only the security, but the religious freedom aspect of it generates the level of outrage similar actions by the Soviet bloc had generated back in the day with President Reagan and the late Pope John Paul II. We need those types of personalities to rise up and step up to the plate. I think there is no other way than to speak up instead of allowing completely shameful deals and oppression between the Catholic Church and bloodthirsty regimes to persist in that manner.
Like I said, now we're living in a new phase, the phase that this agreement between the Vatican and Nicaragua has silenced the church, has silenced. After a year of a strong struggle, and the religious leaders were liberated, were incarcerated, but in exchange of that, we have a silenced church. That should be worried the world, but it's not. And the other thing, I just want to let it clear. Nicaragua is the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has the audacity to open the door to the Taliban. The only country. And the second that has this high-level relationship after China.
Unbelievable. Well, thank you so much, and
Thank you.
And I hope anyone watching this will continue not only pay attention but take action to explore, read for themselves, write about this, put pressure on your representatives, on your government officials to take this a little bit more seriously than we have so far. We can't afford to have these kinds of problems in our own backyard. For all the talks about security, if we're only dealing with the symptoms but not the causes, we are never going to solve these issues. And of course, the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio will continue to illuminate issues that are not sufficiently covered in the mainstream discourse, whether it's in the media or policy analysis, and we will, of course, be back with a new issue and a new discussion next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Thank you for everyone watching us, and have a great evening. Thank you.